again to another episode of Freedom at the Crossroads. This is Tony Taria from Freedom at the Crossroads, helping women everywhere look better, feel better without the pressure. This is our Goddess Thoughts and the Undomesticated Woman. Yes, that's the prevailing theme for 2019. And got a few thoughts, reminiscings, and rants. In keeping with the undomesticated woman theme, just exploring some thoughts for today and hoping you'll chime in at some point and share your memories, share your story, even as I'm sharing mine. And it all has to do with conditioning, or otherwise known as domestication. I remember as a little girl running around playing, rough and tumbling, having so much fun, feeling so free. And as a girl of two worlds, being born in the West, in the industrialized nation of the USA, and then growing up as a child of Africa in Africa, it was interesting. And I had a number of interesting experiences as a young girl. But one thing that always struck me, even then, even as a girl, even as a young girl, running and playing, watching my older siblings, playing in schools, the one jarring thing I can remember, and it wasn't something that was like night and day, but on some level, it began to ring louder and louder and louder as I played. And it was subtle motions from the parents, my parents, with love, but subtle motions to tone it down a bit. We're in a different place. Tone it down a bit. And I remember a friend of my dad's shushing me, telling me and my parents, this is no place for you, for a child. You're a girl. You're too loud. Too loud? And even in my young mind then, something rebelled in me. Something was refusing to be silenced. And even as I got older, I had that discomfort, that internal voice within me saying, no, 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 to all of that subtle conditioning and then not so subtle conditioning. I remember going to an all-girls middle school. Elementary school was, co-ed, but in a lot of schools in West Africa, in Nigeria in particular, as you get older, the middle schools and high schools, a lot of them tend to be segregated by gender. An all-girls school and all-boys school. And that's when the conditioning became more overt, more in your face, I guess, and more jarring. And every time I experienced some aspect of conditioning culturally, there was a part of my soul that rebelled and cried out. And even as I formed friendships and whatnot, it could not be silenced. And that led me to feel like an outsider because I felt like I was the only one who was fighting the conditioning. Have you ever felt like you're part of something, part of a group, but still not part of a group? Like you're a participant, but at the same time you are an observer. And every time I had an internal conflict wrestling with conditioning, social, cultural conditioning, I fell more and more into that space of feeling like I was on the fringes of culture. And my parents, my mom in particular, was a very wise and articulate woman. She had so many dreams. She learned so much. She had a lot of degrees under her belt, to say the least. But she grew up in an era where she was way beyond her time in both education, mindset, and wisdom. And to this day, I mourn the fact that she was a soul that was out of time. And this, I guess, echoes of her voice, echoes of her story, I carry with me this day. And that, little did I know, I would take on more of that story and it would become meshed with mine, and it would cause me to become more resistant to conditioning, to domestication. And in that is power. Because you cannot seek freedom, you cannot be free, you cannot break the cycle, break the silence, if you don't know you've been silenced to begin with. It's like asking a blind woman to tell you the color of the sunset. It's like telling someone who cannot hear to describe the lyrics of a song that only the hearing can hear. And so this is the battle of the sexes. I remember that was the prevailing thing when I was growing up as a young girl and becoming a young woman. Battle between the sexes. Men, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. But all of that pop culture and media skewing of real issues that women struggle with, that completely misses the point, because it did nothing to empower us. It did nothing to break the silence and break the cycle. And it's only with the awakening that women are beginning to break the cycle, break the silence. And when I speak of conditioning, when I speak of the undomesticated woman, this is what I speak of. And I speak of this in the space and in the context of self-care. Self-care is health-care. And it is advocacy. And it is active. And when you fail to see the importance of self-care, self-nurturing, feeding oneself, because you don't have time, You say you don't have time, and I say this in quotes. You don't have time to take a nap. You don't have time to eat a proper meal. You don't have time to decompress. You don't have time for meditation. You don't have time for you. That quote unquote me time. I've said it once, I've said it twice. That is bondage. And it speaks to the underlying issues women everywhere are still facing on a global scale. And that is inequity. Inequity, the underpinnings of misogyny and patriarchy in a lot of our cultures throughout the world. And it's more overt in cultures and societies that are less industrialized or more traditional, like in Africa and the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Asia itself, where, for lack of a better phrasing, forgive me if I offend anybody, but more traditional societies. And I say traditional because I speak to that aspect of the society where the culture is more homogenous, less diverse, and so it is more insular. And that's what I mean by that. So I hope you understand what I'm getting at when I speak to when I say traditional culture. And I guess what activates me every time I see the vestiges of this in media, in pop culture, if you will, and even in daily interactions in places of business and social gatherings, that undomesticated woman within me has to give voice and challenge that when I see it in operation, particularly when it comes to women's health and wellness, because the truth of the matter is women are still dying, and they're not just dying. The dreams, the hopes, the aspirations, the stories that they carry, the important messages and gifts that need to be unpacked on this plane of existence. Once these women die, the story dies with them. The gift dies with them. The dream dies with them. And that should not be. No dream, no life, no gift should be destroyed on the altar of OPE, other people's expectations. And I'm so passionate about this because I know what that feels like, and I know what that looks like. I know what it feels like because I watched women in my lineage fall victim to OPE. The outcome wasn't good for them. It wasn't good for the people around them, and it wasn't good, definitely wasn't good for me. And as a carrier of that story, of that lineage, it is my duty and my sacred purpose to help other women break the silence, break the cycle, and break that silence, because it is destructive, it is oppressive, it is ugly. and it is unaligned with their ultimate purpose, with who they were called to be in this universe. And I think it's time for the goddess to awaken, for the huntress to come forth. I know I mentioned the huntress archetype in an earlier podcast, and that's something that's coming down the road. But it's all in alignment and within the theme and trajectory of the undomesticated woman, because I feel this is a powerful time for women to arise and reclaim their power, because in reclaiming their power, they reclaim who they are as entities, as powerful beings, as complete and whole beings without dependence on external forces for validation. How can, ask yourself this, how can you base your existence on an external force or an external entity? How can you say to an outside force, aka other people's expectations, give you wholeness, define who you are, give fullness, give weight, cause your being to coalesce, give you solidity, give you form? How can you ask something external? How can you depend on something external to define a living entity? And that's what's wrong with silence. Because silence denies you. It denies your personhood. It denies who you are. And this puts us in a position where women across the globe, we struggle with the issues of inequity in healthcare, in security, in safety. One has only to consult the research online and available even through the World Health Organization, the UN publications, when it comes to violence against women, when it comes to discrimination against women in the workplace and in all other spheres of society. I've spoken earlier about Malala, what happened to her, a young girl in the Middle East who was literally suffered abuse and was shot. And such hatred leveled against her. Why? Because she was a quote-unquote mere girl who had the audacity to advocate for education. She wanted an education. She had the audacity to break the silence. And such violence was leveled against her to the point that murder was the ultimate goal in silencing her. And she's not alone in this. She might be one of the more public and globalized stories. But there are many stories like that across the globe, particularly in the Middle East, in West Africa and other parts of Africa, in India, in Saudi Arabia, where artists, female artists, and poets and advocates have been mysteriously disappeared. There was an incident where one was, she was a radio personality and she was an activist, a young, beautiful woman, and she was disappeared only for her body to be found later, savaged. She had been brutally assaulted before being murdered. And all in an attempt to silence her, to maintain dominance and power structures and status quos. And this is what women fight today. And just because it seems or appears to be more benign because we speak within the parameters of self-care and, as we call it here in the West, health and wellness industry. The reality of it is that the brutality is no less violent, more subtle, more insidious, but it is killing women nonetheless. And that is why it's time to break the silence. It's time to break the cycle. It's time for the goddess to awaken and the huntress to arise. This is Tony from Freedom at the Crossroads, helping women everywhere look better, feel better without the pressure. What's your story? Are you ready to break your silence? Are you ready to break the cycle? Get ready.